You're listening to the Visibly Fit podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Wendie Pett, and every week I'll give you holistic, practical solutions for everyday issues related to nutrition, healing, functional fitness, and behavior modifications. As a naturopath, fitness expert, and wellness coach for over 20 years, my goal is to empower you to reach for greater health and to rise up to your next level of living in mind, body, and spirit. You were created with greatness in mind. It's time to own it. Are you with me? Then let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this episode of Visibly Fit. I'm your host, Wendie Pett, and I am so excited to have my guest on with me today. Last month, I had a licensed marriage and family therapist on, and this month I'm having one on as well because 'tis the season with the holidays. And I just think it's so vital that we have the right tools and maybe just some extra little tips to help us with our relationships during this time. So I have a perfect guest today, but this podcast is part of the Spark Media Network, and it can be found on the Edify app, pray.com, and KHCB Uplifted Streaming, and all the other major platforms where you're probably listening to as well. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you so much, and always love spending this time with you. But today, Dr. Shannon Francom, who is an LMFT, is a licensed psychotherapist with extensive expertise treating individuals, couples, and families with a wide range of presenting problems. With specific education and training as a licensed marriage and family therapist, she is qualified to work with individuals of all ages and families dealing with a variety of concerns, including, and this is a lot, but man, she attacks the issues: depression and anxiety, trauma, addiction, grief and loss, marital and relationship problems, family issues, parenting, co-parenting, divorce, eating disorders, postpartum concerns, faith crisis issues, and many, many more. So Dr. Shannon, she currently runs a private practice outside of, not too far from my hometown, but outside of Dallas, Texas, where she treats patients and supervises associate and intern therapists and develops and presents various workshops around the community. Dr. Shannon fosters a therapeutic relationship with clients utilizing compassion, realness, I love that, realness and validation, and enjoys incorporating humor into sessions. I really like that. Dr. Shannon grew up as an Army brat, living all over the country, and relocated to Texas in 2014. She has been married for over 10 years, has 3 beautiful children, and Dr. Shannon enjoys trail running, reading, baking, warm weather, me too, sister, animals, and spending time with her family and friends. And she completed her bachelor's degree at BYU, master's degree at Arizona State University, and doctorate degree at North Central University. So welcome to Visibly Fit, Dr. Shannon. I am so excited that you're with us. This is such an interesting time of year. And hi, so good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is so awesome. This is such an interesting time of year. And in your bio, you say you're an Army brat. And so immediately I'm like, oh my goodness, she has had kind of the world's education, if you will, of learning about people and how they tick, and meeting probably some interesting people along the way through your growing up years. So tell us, before we get started, how did you come into becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist, and how did that passion all evolve?
Yeah, I would say that it sort of found me in a way. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to, do when I grew up. When I was in college, I still didn't know quite yet. I knew that I wanted to work with treating people, and so I had, I kind of did some pre-nursing, and then I was thinking about medical school, and it just was like great, but not quite where I was supposed to be. And then I graduated from college with a bachelor's in exercise physiology. So I sort of started working with people with their bodies.
That's
in
cool. I
essence.
didn't know that. That's
You know,
awesome.
the training and physical therapy and that sort of stuff. But while I was in college and, you know, having various roommates, I just, you know, you got to know them and you heard about where they're from, their backgrounds and their families. And I just started to notice, okay, like there's these patterns or these common issues that happen in all families across the board, no matter what part of the country they're from, no matter what religion they have, there's just these common problems. And I was just like, there's got to be a reason to that. And that's what sort of piqued my interest when it came to relationships and families, and different mental health issues and psychology. And I graduated, still didn't quite sure know what I was going to do. And I was talking with my uncle one summer after I graduated, and he was like, well, no, you can go get a master's degree. I was like, just finished my bachelor's. I was like, I don't want to go back to school with all
More
that.
school?
Yeah. And I was like, but you know what? This isn't where I don't want to do a master's degree in like this field per se. He was like, well, you can get a master's degree in anything. And I just was like, oh. And so I just, I was moving to Arizona that fall, and I just started searching through different programs at Arizona, in Arizona. And this one popped up, and I just knew it. It was like this mind and body sensation experience. And I was like, I don't really know a whole lot about this, but this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm going to do. And I just hit submit for an application, and then the rest is history, as they say. And the rest of my journey all the way up to here, over and over again, puzzle pieces just continue to fall into place as they should. I like to think of it as the mechanism of a clock, and how there's those things that just sort of go like this, you know. Yeah. And that's how it's been from there forward.
I would say it's very divinely appointed then. And so sure. I love that. I love that. Well, cool. Well, you mentioned with your roommates and with other, I mentioned you being an Army brat and seeing all kinds of people growing up. What are these common problems that you see, and what that brings people to see you? What are these common threads that you see over and over again, so that we can kind of, the listener kind of say, yeah, that happens in my family too. And then how can we address those in just a second of maybe how to get through them a little bit easier?
Sure. Yeah. Well, with regards to roommates, we had various, women roommates. And so one of the common problems with women, especially in that age group of, 18 to 25, is going to be eating disorders, self-esteem, body image, all that sort of stuff. And that was a very, very common thing. All of, my friends and roommates had something like that to one degree or another of severity. And they would talk about different things that their mom or dad would say or do, that were just sort of these common threads. Another being a lot of contention between parents. Some parents were still married, some parents were divorced. And then as well as tension with one or both parents. And a lot feeling like they don't understand, or they have unrealistic expectations of me, or wanting to sort of please and validate their parents, but not really liking their parents and sort of feeling torn.
I remember those days.
Yeah. And, the whole, talking about different fights, and it would be like the same fight. Like we'd share stories, and it was like, that's the exact same fight that happened there. That's the same fight that happened there. So those were sort of the initial ones that I started to recognize.
So does it seem like it's a little bit of a communication issue, as well as not understanding one another's love language? And so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when it comes to couples and families, the ones that I typically treat in my practice, and individuals, the couples will typically come to see me because of either infidelity issues. And if there's not an infidelity issue, then it's what they refer to as communication. And communication is interesting because that's what we sort of call it. But most of us who are functioning adults and hold a job obviously can communicate.
Right.
We don't necessarily have as individuals, don't necessarily have a communication problem. We can speak, we can listen, we can type an email, we can express our thoughts cohesively, coherently. And we get promotions, we do customer service. So we know how to communicate. And so then a couple say, well, we can't communicate with each other. And that's more where it is. It's the in-between. So it's not two individuals not knowing how to communicate, but it's sort of this in-between part that gets messed up. And again, it's not about lacking communication skills. It kind of comes down to two things. One being a lack of sort of understanding of one's own emotional world or experience, and then not being able to express that effectively. And then therefore our partner actually isn't getting what we're saying because we're not actually being able to communicate what's going on inside.
So it starts with you as the individual first, and to get a handle on your own emotions and feelings, and understand who you are and whose you are. Yeah. And then you can show up differently. And I would imagine, I mean, I've lived a lot of years, and I've seen different phases of my life as I've blossomed and matured. There's different stages, I believe, as we mature in age, as far as how we communicate and the compassion we give, not just to our spouse or friend, but also to ourselves. And so do you think some of that is brought on ourselves? Like we just don't give ourselves enough compassion, and with the expectations of, how would I say it? I guess kind of just peer pressure because of social media and that kind of thing, that it causes a false identity issue. And that's kind of that inner struggle, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. The issue being one of the issues being, yes, we're not really sort of in touch with ourselves. We're not really solid in who we are, where we're from, where we're going, sort of thing. And if we're not really all sure of that, our partner can't know that either if we don't even know that.
Right.
And there's a lot of reasons why we are sort of kind of all over the place or struggling with certain things. And yeah, social media being a huge part of that, and this sort of comparison culture. Another part being just the really old school keeping up with the Joneses sort of mentality. And another part being our family of origin, and how were emotions talked about or not talked about in our families growing up. And not only about how were emotions talked about, but how was the expressing of emotions dealt with?
Process.
Were you allowed to express emotions? Were you allowed to talk about how you felt? Were you not allowed to talk about how you felt? Were there some feelings that you were allowed to have and you were allowed to communicate, but other feelings like being angry? No, don't be angry. Don't be angry. Or you stop crying. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, so I'll give you something to cry about. That's what I had. I'll give you something to cry about.
Yes. So, yeah. And so then crying is just, we only cry, like crying's bad, but and if we do cry, it'll only be about scary just all sorts of these implicit rules that we grow up with regarding what emotions are, what's allowed to be expressed, how they're expressed, and then what happens to us and how we feel after we do express them. Because then that teaches us, that felt good, that was a good experience, or nope, that was not a good experience, I'm not doing that ever again.
Right. And we become programmed.
And then we bring all of that. Yeah, exactly. We internalize all these messages, and then we bring that into our marriage. And we have one person with all these internalized messages, and then one person with all of these.
It's a miracle, really. Marriage is a miracle.
I agree. I agree.
So, but with that said, the miracle of marriage is something that I think maybe sometimes we, as a culture, dismiss because it's, number one, too easy to get married, and number two, too easy to get divorced. And so the miracle of marriage needs to go back to the miracle in the person who designed marriage to begin with. And that's our Heavenly Father. But as we're, I digress, but as we are going into this season, this Christmas season, do you see an escalation during this time of year, especially with family and marriage tension And if so, you know, how can someone recognize the start of these tensions so that they can have a different outcome and that they can sit around the Christmas table and have a joyful, wonderful holiday time?
Yeah, absolutely. The holiday season sort of stereotypically known for being a little more messy, right? I believe there's more car accidents during this time of the year, and that can be equated to weather, right? But there's also a lot more drinking,
Right.
and social gatherings, and that sort of stuff. I think the suicide rate comes up a little bit during the holiday season as well.
Right.
And there's a lot of reasons why this is a harder time for people. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it's, you know, family. Regardless of the culture or religion with regards to Christmas, a common theme with the holidays is family and getting together. And so when you have that, that means you have in-laws involved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a big reason why there's a lot of kind of stress and tension.
Or maybe those
Another
that
reason-
don't have family, right?
Yes,
Too much.
absolutely.
They're
Absolutely.
grieving family
Yes.
loss. Yeah.
Yeah, because the holidays are also this excited. You know, think about the Christmas songs that we have. It's the most wonderful time of the year. The Christmas is in the air. There's this sort of the palpable like sensation of Christmas, and there's a lot of excitement and high expectations. And not all the time those expectations are met. Sometimes there's a lot of disappointment, you know.
Yeah.
Who knows what sort of background that people come from, you know, and it can be, the holidays can become associated with a lot of disappointment and unmet expectations with regards to Christmas Day or just family being there or showing up for you. And so there's kind of some trauma sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes with the holidays.
Yeah. And it is the most wonderful time of the year because Jesus was born during this time. So they say, I think it's actually more in, I think, March or April. I don't know, but this is when we celebrate it. And so that is what makes it so wonderful. But we do, I think we put so many expectations and really we find out maybe you're in like a lonely season and you're like, this isn't so wonderful, but to give yourself compassion and love through this time and realize that we're all going through something and to lean in and not feel like you have to do it alone and to lean in, even if to go and meet with someone like yourself so that someone has someone to talk to and that it's okay. It's okay to unpack those feelings and emotions. And so, do you have like maybe a practical tip to help families to enjoy the real reason for this season, instead of falling into the stress and anxiety that often occurs?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I like to encourage others to, you know, as the season's approaching or even at the beginning or even just now, if you're here now and it's like, getting sort of crazy and out of control, is to pause and say, okay, what is your reason for the season? Now, yes, if you happen to be of the Christian faith, then it's the celebration of Jesus Christ's birth. If you're Jewish, there's Hanukkah. Lots of people from those religions will also sort of celebrate the other as well. There's the commercial aspect of Christmas as well, right? But whatever your faith being, yes, that would be your reason for the season. But what else do you want or feel is the reason for the season? Is it about time with your kids, your immediate family, right? Is it about creating memories? Is it about serving others? Good. Really just stepping outside of yourself. And this, you know, the Christmas for me is about bringing like joy to others who are less fortunate. You know, what is your reason? Sort of quiet down all this outside noise. Why do you care about this? And then that be the sort of guide for what you do the rest of the season. And if it happens to be more, you know, family oriented and of service, then don't put time and energy into making a bajillion Christmas presents for all of your kids' classmates or their teachers or anything like that doesn't sort of focus on your reason for the season.
Yeah, that's good. Just out of obligation or people pleasing. I think there's a lot of people pleasing issues sometimes during this season as well. And do you find that to be true?
Oh yes, absolutely. There's okay. there would be like, okay, well, I've got to get my second grader, I've got all of their class stuff, and I got to get a present for their teacher. And then we've got to go over, we've got all of these people, and I've got to make sure I get all these presents here. And there's just sort of all of this people pleasing if I don't want anybody to be forgotten. And I've got to give, I've got to make or give or buy something to give to show them. And a lot of worried about, well, so-and-so's mom's going to be sending cookies this year to the Christmas party. I have to, what am I going to do? I got to either meet that or up my game, because the teacher will think I'm not a good parent, or I don't care, or I'm not involved. And so, yeah, a lot of worrying about what others are going to sort of think, when in reality, we are all just sort of worried about ourselves and our own family. We're really not paying attention to what Miss Smith over across the street is sort of doing.
Like, if it's on your heart and you have time and it feels good, do it. But honestly, the last couple of years, I didn't even send out Christmas cards, and I was like, I'm okay with it. I'm like, Merry Christmas, everybody. Here's our photo on Facebook. That was about as good as I could get. But this year might be different, and that's okay. But I think sometimes we just put that pressure on ourselves. So why do you suppose that when certain hardships hit a marriage or a family, that couples tend to turn against each other rather than support one another? And do you have any examples that you can share, obviously without sharing names?
Sure. Yeah. When we think of some sort of like trial or hardship, whether it be loss of a job, loss of a child, anything like that, these situations tend to either bring couples closer or drive them apart. And a lot of that has to do with how, if we're talking about a marriage, for example, how each spouse just deals with hardships to begin with. So let's say we're discussing a hardship that has to do with grief. The whole process of grief and mourning is a very individual experience. People mourn how they mourn. Part of learning about the mourning process and going through the grieving process is understanding that everybody grieves differently. So that in and of itself, if we're talking about grief per se, but just dealing with hardships in general, that in and of itself is that everybody deals with and processes hardships differently. Chances are you and your spouse are going to deal with those things differently. So you begin to see your spouse dealing with this in a way that it doesn't resonate with you. And then you start to tell yourself stories like, here she doesn't care, here she doesn't get it. And maybe there's even blame on your partner because of the hardship, again, depending on the nature of it. So big piece being, we conceptualize and then deal with hardships differently. And then if our partner is sort of not responsive to our way of dealing, that sort of creates a whole other hardship. Does that? No,
I think, totally. And I think, as you mentioned, just that inner dialogue that really are lies that you start telling yourself, like, oh, they don't care. Look, they're not even grieving. And that's not true. They're just grieving in a different way. And maybe they're not grieving the same way you are, but they are. And then you start to paint this picture of what really isn't there. And then that's what causes the wedge. And so we know that the family unit is vital. I mean, it's just vital. And there's, I don't even know the statistics currently of divorce. I'm sure you do. But what would you say in terms of those that have faith versus those that don't? And maybe you don't have any stats on that. I'm just curious, because I would think that those that have a high level of faith, a good foundation, tend to have a greater success in dealing with traumas or grief or anything that they're dealing with as a couple or family. You have stats on that?
Yes. There are. I don't know the most recent
numbers.
Stats. Right. Yes. But typically in the past, if a couple had some sort of faith-based paradigm with regards to marriage, it was sort of a buffer or this protective factor that decreased the chances of divorce. And the reason for that, there's multiple reasons, but one being If you have the same sort of faith or background, there's going to be more similarities than differences, therefore less to fight about, right?
Right. That's why they say be equally yoked, right?
Sure. Yes. And then also with regards to your understanding of and your belief in, the purpose of life or what happens after. A lot of those types of things can bring comfort. They can also bring pain for some as well. But that can be a guiding light for couples. What's interesting though is over the past couple of decades, having a religion and common religion, the protective factor is sort of decreasing a little bit. So let's say this was the divorce rate at like 50% of just all couples, and 50% would get divorced. Then this was sort of like the divorce rate would be lower with couples who had like a faith-based, or a religion. Theirs was less of a divorce rate. It's sort of starting to come to be about even, and it's having less of a positive impact on
Interesting.
couples.
Let's talk about that. Why do you think that is?
Yes. I believe that when it came to, another part of religion playing a role in keeping a marriage together, sort of decreasing the chances of divorce, is because there's a lot of shame around divorce. Nobody just wants to experience or go through divorce, but there's so many layered factors to divorce, with regards to shame and what are your religious beliefs about divorce? Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? And it's becoming more common in general, right? Over the years.
Right.
But a good thing has been happening with regards to sort of all religions, and I'm talking about like the organized religion part, sort of being a little bit more progressive with not sort of implementing this like shame and guilt mentality when we're not perfect, right? And that's good. But since we're feeling less shame and guilt about our mistakes or worrying about what others are going to think and our failures, that was actually a big part of keeping couples together, right or wrong, whether that was a good thing or not. That was a factor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it kind of does. And also I would say I would kind of challenge, I guess, the conversation to say that maybe people aren't practicing their faith like they used to. And so therefore they dismiss it and don't really see the biblical truth of, I'm talking with my audience here, since this is mainly a Christian faith-based audience, the biblical truths of what God says around a marriage. And so they're not as compliant, if you will, because they're just not practicing and even reading God's word and really resonating. They're just kind of doing their own thing, living their own life and dismissing. So maybe that's why it's kind of starting to become a little more balanced. Unfortunately, actually.
Right. Yeah.
Because our children need and deserve, and I'm a second married. I mean, I've been married twice, so I'm speaking from experience. I know the power of having a solid family. And then whenever there's a broken part, how it really does affect the children. And it's just hard. So I don't think that that's how we're designed, but it does happen. And so as a licensed marriage and family therapist, you are someone that can help these families maneuver in a healthy way. And there's no condemnation, there's no shame, there's none of that. It's just getting them to a place of, okay, this is really right for us to do this or that, or no, we do have what it takes. And let's reevaluate how we're, quote unquote, communicating to one another, and actually it's like communicating with myself and figuring myself out. And then because two broken people or one broken person can really affect the wholeness of a marriage. So it's about getting yourself whole, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that something you share a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. In order to have a healthy relationship, you have to have two healthy people. I mean, you're not going to make an apple pie with rotten apples and
or tomatoes,
or tomatoes, exactly, right? To see whatever. So you're bringing ingredients into this recipe of marriage.
Yeah.
And if something's like stale or old or like it's a hot mess or traumatized or just, that's going to get all mixed in there and it's going to have an impact. So really healthy, two healthy individuals coming into a relationship, you know, it's the chances of that being successful and happy and fulfilling, you know, are extremely, extremely high.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And we all have our hot mess moments. And I think that that's
Absolutely.
something to talk about too. Like none of us are going to be so whole because none of us are perfect. We're a sinful bunch. And so regarding our hot mess moments, what are maybe some tactics or some tools that you would suggest for someone in order to get through a hot mess moment with their spouse or with a family member, their teenager or whatever, especially during this season? Do you have like maybe some a 1, 2, 3? Here's what you do. Here's some things to look at so that you can get through this easier and better.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I usually talk about with people when it comes to just conflict in general, but then especially with the holidays is we usually think of just anger when it comes to conflict, right? I mean, those two sort of go hand in hand.
And do you think that has to do with control?
A
lot of times.
It depends, right?
Yeah,
so this is how I like to present it. I'll in my office when I work with people, I'll draw it on the board and I'll call it the anger tree. I draw a tree and then I draw, a line and then I draw roots. And the anger tree is what we see above ground. And the roots is what's actually underneath anger. And so I have this visual representation of here's anger, the tree, what you see, and that's a secondary emotion. And all of the roots are the primary emotions. That is where all of the anger comes from. And those roots, those basic emotions are going to be things like fear, hurt, betrayal, hopelessness, insecurity, whatever it may be. And so yes, grief, all of that sort of stuff. And so it's whenever this is what I like to do. Whenever you're angry, you have to figure out what it is that you're actually feeling, where that's coming. I mean, you're feeling anger, but it's come from somewhere else. Yeah. And when you said control, I love when people come to me and they say, my spouse is a control freak, or I'm a control freak. And I'm like, great. Now we can fix that. We can work on that, because the control, it's not because you wake up each day plotting, how can I upset others by trying to micromanage them or control them? That's not what control freaks do. They don't wake up thinking about how to make others miserable.
Right.
Wanting to control things and to have things just so comes from a place of fear. And it's all about just sort of creating some sort of structure or stability to help them feel more secure. So fear being one of the primary emotions. Yep. It's going to be into anger. It's going to manifest as anger, or it's going to manifest as controlling or anything like that. So my biggest thing would say, anger, great. You've identified that. Okay. What's underneath it? And then that's what we start to work with. And then it would be for other people who are dealing with anger, whether it's their teenager who's just, she's such a snot and she's always slamming the door and all of this. I'm like, okay, she's angry, right? Well, now you know that there's something underneath. Yeah. And if you can just talk to her about or identify what's actually there, start talking to her about that, everything will be different.
That's so good. And to pull that root out, right, from that tree, that's really cool. That's a good visualization to see that. In my quiet time this morning, I was going through and reading about Moses, and he was in the promised land. They were trying to get to the promised land, the Israelites, but they were, grumbling because they didn't have water. And God's like, all right, Moses, take your staff and go hit the rock and calmly and gentle do this. And I'll, expose water and everybody will be happy. It'd be great. Well, in his frustration, because here's the roots, right? Here's the roots. He's tired. He's frustrated because all these people are complaining and whatever. He goes at that rock with anger. And then therefore, the water still happened because God promised the water, but the anger kept him from the promised land because God said, do this in a gentle, kind way, or I can't remember the exact words, but gently. And so I think how often we are so just human, right? Like we really do have good intentions and we do want to give people what they want and ourselves as well, but we go at it with just that wrong attitude, and it can trip us up and keep us stuck and not get into our promised land, basically.
Right. Yeah. Because you can imagine if you were in his shoes, Moses' shoes.
Oh, I'd be exhausted too.
Sure. exhausted. And how terrified would you be to be responsible for all of these people? Like,
seriously,
of course, he was dealing with so much like fear and worry and all of this pressure. And so, all of that those are all roots for anger. And so it just, I mean, it makes absolute sense when we sort of like pull back and we sort of look at anger, we understand that anger, and then there being the roots. It all just really, really makes a whole lot more sense. Yeah,
it really does. And that anger won't get you to where you want to be. And that's in a healthy relationship. So I appreciate you so much, Dr. Shannon. I mean, you are helping so many people, and I know you have an incredible practice there in the Dallas area. And so thanks for coming on. Is there like maybe one thing that you would leave with my audience that maybe is something that you tell your patients on a regular basis that might be something of encouragement to help them in this time, or if they're feeling a little stuck? What's kind of a phrase or some word that you would give them today?
Okay, that's a good question. I have a lot of different things that apply to different situations and people. But I think the biggest thing that's coming to me right now is just take a breath and just remember who you are. Remember who you are. And then that can sort of guide you with regards to this matters, this doesn't matter. In the long term, this doesn't matter either. But just remember who you are, which is a child of God. Yep. And a lot of that will be very helpful in sort of navigating through different challenges. Of course, I like to say that there's a lot of resources, right? There's religious, faith resources, there's doctors, there's therapists, there's a lot of resources that I think Heavenly Father and Jesus have provided for us to use to get healthy and to get whole. So utilize the gifts and blessings that we have.
That's so good. Thank you so very much. If someone wants to look you up, and I know that you practice again in the Dallas area, is it, what is your website?
It's just www.shannonfrancom.com.
ShannonFrancom.com. That is so perfect. All right. If you're listening and you want to find out more, go to her website. But thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insight, and blessings to you and your family, and have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much for having me, and Merry Christmas to you guys as well.
All right. Take care. And thank you for tuning in to Visibly Fit. We will catch you next time. Well, that's a wrap for today's show. So thank you so much for tuning in. I love spending this time with you. To learn more and get more free resources, just head on over to wendiepett.com. And thank you in advance for sharing this episode and this podcast, following and subscribing, not only to this podcast, but finding me on social media, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are, I'm probably there too. Until next week and our next podcast time together, make it a Visibly Fit day.